I'm Adnan Mahmutovic, and this is Love and Its Discontents podcast. It is great pleasure to welcome Nagihan Haliloglu from Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. She is a lecturer in comparative literature, and I know that she also wrote her PhD on Jean Rhys, who is going to be our subject today. Nagihan, welcome to Love and Its Discontents.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting, happy, and fearsome to be talking about Jean Rhys again.
That's really wonderful. I mean, I feel I was so lucky to have found you because I had already prepared some episodes on Jane Eyre, and I was thinking, okay, I need to talk about Wide Sargasso Sea, and I was looking for someone, and you came out of nowhere. This was really fate. This meeting, yes. And in a sense, I think I want to start by saying something just about the interesting situation that we have right now and why this is such a wonderful occasion. Because right now, as we are recording this, we have this situation between Turkey and Sweden, the politics about NATO, the Quran burnings, the burning of the books, and the protests and all that. So for me, this is really interesting, especially because we know. Okay, so I'm originally Bosnian, but I live in Sweden, so I'm Bosnian Swedish. You are Turkish. Right now, you're calling from England, right?
Yes.
Yes. Sweden has this long kind of flirt with the Turks or the Ottoman Empire and Turkey, and this goes back to the 15th, 16th century.
I'm sorry, they stole the meatballs from us, no?
We stole a lot from you guys. Yes, I mean we consider cabbage rolls, dolma, one of our national dishes, which we serve at Christmas, for instance. And there's lots of words we stole from you. But for me, this is a really interesting situation because Sweden has always been. We're kind of in love with Turkey, Turkey in love with Sweden. This is a long-standing relationship. Almost makes us Bosnians kind of jealous.
The Turks love no one better than the Bosnians. You should know
that. I know that. Yes, but it's really interesting this kind of long-standing relationship with this Nordic country. I think that was not a part of the Ottoman Empire, and in fact. One thing that people don't know is that that religious freedom and freedom of speech, which we talk about a lot right now, actually came to Sweden as a result of these relationships with Turkey. It was because there were Turks here that they allowed people to practice their religions, for instance. So it's just a kind of an example of cultures meeting and producing something positive. Which is something I want to discuss in Jean Rhys' novel Wide Sargasso Sea as well. This kind of thing when cultures meet, when empires meet, when there are masters and slaves, and what happens to things that we care about, like love, for instance. So I'd like to begin this by saying something about Jean Rhys and Wide Sargasso Sea. First of all, if you could tell us, the plot, or just describe what the book is about in one or two sentences.
Sure. Well, I say sure, but of course I may have more than two or three sentences to say. Anyway, I don't know. We could maybe start with Rochester shortly. So Rochester, who is a second son, which I think is very much part of what we could talk about. A second son who has been deprived of love and property, comes to the Caribbean, and the marriage is arranged between him and Antoinette, whose family has had several mishaps and misfortunes. And they think that Rochester is a good fit for her. And then they get married. And again, another thing, is there love in that marriage? And, has there even been a courtship between the two? Is it some kind of a contract that will save both sides? Antoinette getting married to Rochester sort of makes her whiter, because, of course, being white is very, very important in the Caribbean. And after a while, Rochester thinks that he has made a mistake by marrying this woman, because he's been hearing stories about how there's madness in her family. And then he decides it's better that they go to England, where he can tame her more easily. And that is it. The rest is Jane Eyre.
The rest is Jane Eyre, yes. And I want you to, as I said, I've already covered some material on Jane Eyre and the love in Victorian era. So I would like us to contextualize this novel. If you could tell us, what do you think? If maybe Jean Rhys has actually explicitly said it somewhere, I don't know if she has, but in any case, if you could contextualize this novel in relation to Jane Eyre. Obviously, it borrows some characters from Jane Eyre.
Yeah.
Is it what we would now call a prequel? Is it a spin-off? Is it fan fiction? What is it? What did Jean Rhys do?
It's what we call in the business the empire writing back. So, I mean, there are... Jean Rhys has a short autobiography called Smile, Please. And in it, she talks about, again, going back to books, what kind of books she grew up with. And she describes the books being actually not unlike in an Ottoman household, being sort of behind these glass sort of cupboards. And, they were very precious. And of course, because the Caribbean is very humid, you need to protect the books. And one of the books that she reads is Jane Eyre. And when she reads that, she thinks, okay, this Caribbean woman is completely misrepresented. So it's something that she has grown up with from her teenage years, that, this is not what we are like. And, I need to address this representation, as it were. And then she goes to England. And of course, the story bears a lot of resemblance to her own childhood, but particularly the way white Creole women are represented in Victorian English literature is something that she is trying to grapple with, I would say.
Oh yes, definitely. I mean, that's what the novel feels like, and it really feels like. It feels very personal, right? It's not just like, okay, I'm doing this outside of some kind of a theoretical consideration. This really strikes close to heart, doesn't it?
Yes, and of course, if you take this novel along with her other novels, which are also quite short, they're always about experiences of young women in England and France. These sort of almost post-colonial women or post-emancipation women, emancipation as in emancipation of slaves, how coming from the colonies, their whiteness is somehow tainted, and how they find it very difficult to kind of integrate into white European society. And if you put it to love, the relationship that she has, or her heroines have, with white men are in fact a stand-in for her relationship with England. So it's a way of connecting to England, because when you invited me in to talk about love, to be honest, I mean, I do not see any romantic or sexual love in Wide Sargasso Sea or in her other novels. It's really it's a metaphor really for belonging to the motherland, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. I think that kind of thinking is perhaps even more allegorized in this short story, The Day We Burnt the Books, in which there is this interracial couple, and when the old man or the old white patriarch, the colonizer, dies, the wife starts burning some books and selling some books. And in that, she shows this kind of complex, ambivalent relationship to the empire, that is represented here by the books that she sells or keeps or burns in the story. And I suppose Jane Eyre is here a book that Jean Rhys probably both loves and hates.
Jean Eyre, Rhys. It's kind of like within the same kind of phonic atmosphere.
It really is. It really is. So do you think the way she writes about, the way she kind of reacts or responds to Jane Eyre, is it kind of a love-hate relationship, or is there more love or hate in this response, this empire striking back?
I thought, of course, the first reaction you have when you read the book is, yes, the mad woman in the attic finally got her voice back. So, you see, it's kind of like saying to the Brontes, we can also do it. It's not just these white women who write about other women. But actually, when you read more, I think, when you read it along with Jane Eyre, maybe I myself have mellowed down. I find more of a cooperation between the two rather than this reaction. And not even that. I mean, when you read Wide Sargasso Sea a second time, a third time, and again, when you think about the Victorian context, you also feel the sympathy that Jean Rhys has, even for Rochester, because there's this long letter that Rochester writes to his father. And, every time I read it, it becomes more and more poignant. As I said, he is the second son, which means he's not going to get any money, and he hasn't been shown love. So he's not able to show love himself. And then you think, and you can see that Jean Rhys has thought long and hard about this, saying, why are these Englishmen like this? Why are they so terrible? It's because, they haven't been shown love, that they can't show love. So there's also that kind of sympathy. So maybe it is then beyond writing back, because she can see the point of view of Bronte and then Rochester. Or maybe, as I said, I have mellowed down and I want to see a more kind of synthetic understanding of what has been happening.
I would agree with you on this. I think there are elements in this novel that are, yes, she definitely shows Rochester's actions, especially when he starts turning down Antoinette, who is, by the way, amazing. She is stunningly beautiful. She is rich. I mean, she has all the qualities that an Englishman would be attracted to, unlike Jane, who is poor and plain.
Yes.
Right? And yet
that's the thing, right? Because he has already had that kind of woman. He now wants another kind of woman.
That is true. And there is this sense that, of course, he behaves very badly towards her. We will talk about this, the fact that he changes her name and things like that. But I would agree with you that there is a certain, if not sympathy, at least understanding of his position. When he comes to the Caribbean, he's completely lost. The climate is new. He feels feverish. He thinks he's losing his mind. He doesn't know who he is. So I think that kind of grounding is very interesting to me. She's not immediately attacking him as this nasty colonizer coming there on business or marriage as business.
Yeah.
So she makes us still at least empathize with his situation.
Definitely. But it's interesting when we shift back to Jane Eyre, shift back or forward. He again, in that one as well, he sort of starts off as this really not very nice man. And then Bronte sort of makes us understand why he is the way he is. So in a way, Jean Rhys does the same thing. We start off as, Rochester is the bad man, but sort of slowly coming to an understanding of how his mind works.
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that for me, that is the true kind of writerly way of approaching characters. It's not like these types, but rather as human beings with the kind of love and care, the attempt to understand and represent. So she is thinking like, if I'm going to represent Antoinette the way she should be, I also need to represent others in a more complex way, right?
Yes. But as I said, if we go back to the theme of love, because again, when you said this, I'm really trying hard to find love in this in this novel, because everything seems very contractual, and that is again Victorian England for you. But I don't know, in Islam as well, marriage is a contract. So we really need to recognize this contractual, I guess, side of love. But that kind of longing and yearning you have, I find it, or maybe that's how I read it, her yearning and love for England is is expressed in much more strong language, I think, than her love for Rochester. And again, Rochester is just like an extension of England. If she's accepted by Rochester, that means she will be, accepted by England. And then, so she's kind of twice disappointed in love, in that sense, disappointed in Rochester, and then and again, by extension, disappointed by England.
Oh, definitely. I mean, isn't it in the last scene when she is in England that the way she behaves is a little bit like being taken over by this fever, the way he was when he came to the Caribbean. So it's a similar kind of experience. Yeah. And she is wandering around feverish, thinking, who am I? What am I? My name is not my name. I don't even know who I am any longer. So there's that kind of mirror image you're quite right. But so I see that you are, and I think rightly so, reading this novel as this kind of love, hate, or kind of ambivalent relationship to England, whereas in Jane Eyre, we have a relationship to the Victorian society. Of course, Bronte comments on that, but it is much more focused on the real kind of individual love between
Absolutely.
two individuals.
And this is what is lacking in Wide Sargasso Sea, because in Jane Eyre you see Rochester and Jane flirting, and Rochester is a man of many words and tricks and all these kinds of things in Jane Eyre. I mean, he tries to intrigue and win the love of Jane. In Wide Sargasso Sea, there's nothing. There's no courtship. So that is completely missing. And that is why, it's really difficult to really understand this romantic relationship between the two, if there is any.
Yes, and I do want to discuss that, because there just the way it kind of builds up and so on. But before we do that, do you think you could tell us, how do you think Bronte defines love, so that we can kind of contrast it to Wide Sargasso Sea? What is love in Jane Eyre? What is the ideology of love that she is pushing?
I don't know. And I think, as I said, I mean, it's just kind of this attention, I would say, the attention that Jane is getting from a man. And I mean, in itself, that love is also, I mean, he is practically the first man that she sees. And I liken Jane very much to Miranda in The Tempest. First man she sees, that's it. I mean, that's love. So in that sense, I mean, she doesn't have like a choice in it, but at least Rochester is trying to intrigue her and sort of taking notice of what she's doing. So I think attention to who she is and what she does is really what defines love in Bronte. And if we're comparing backgrounds of the authors, I mean, Jean Rhys's background is much more glamorous than Bronte's in that sense. And Jean Rhys was much more exposed to society than, elegant society, let's say, than Bronte was. So it's also coming from that kind of a background where in Victorian society you're not exposed to, well, particularly if you're a vicar's daughter, you're not that much exposed. Although I understand there are some biopics now sort of turning over that understanding. I mean, there's a film called Emily in which the father of the Brontes seemed to be throwing these wonderful parties where there are lots of people and men and blah, blah, blah. But in any case, it's the attention. Whereas in, I don't know, how would you, Professor Mahmutovic, describe
well, yeah, I mean, I also interviewed Dr. Lisa Ann Robertson on Jane Eyre, and we did speak about this fact that Rochester pays attention to her and to who she is, and that Jane Eyre doesn't want to compromise her selfhood. That it's all about maintaining that who she thinks her integrity. So the fact that she meets a man who will agree to keep her or allow her to keep her integrity is really essential, and that's the kind of connection I see. Is what Jean Rhys emphasizes is the fact that he doesn't allow Antoinette, who is actually not his equal, she is above him in every possible way, in looks, riches, all of those things that the Victorians valued. And yet he will not allow her to have integrity of herself.
Yeah. I mean, actually, when I wrote my book, one of the chapters was on self-possession. And it is something very, very important. But equally, I think Antoinette is readier to give herself in that way. She's readier to lose herself, as it were, in this love that she has, and then if we wanted to, we could then connect it to the magic, the witchcraft.
Yes, please. I want to talk about the magic. That is so important. Yes, absolutely. Black magic, voodoo. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Whereas in Jane Eyre, I mean, as you said, she wants to be Rochester's equal in the sense that, I am my person, you are your person, and then sort of we somehow come together at a midpoint, as it were. But Antoinette is very ready to let go of herself. And then there's this beautiful passage that she, in the book in which she goes to her, I don't know how to define her, Christophine, the woman who's been working for her family, and of course she's black, and by definition she can do voodoo and black magic. So she goes to her and says, you have to make this man love me. And again, this is something Jane Eyre would never think of, because it has to be something mental. That, you decide that you like who I am, and then this is why we are together. And she is, but Antoinette is so desperate that she will resort to magic. And what is interesting in this conversation is that Christophine keeps saying, no, don't do this. Yes. And she's supposed to be the one who's doing the magic, but she is the more rational of the two. She keeps saying, this is why you shouldn't do this. This is why you shouldn't do this. But then because Antoinette is so desperate that she says, okay, we'll do it. But, Christophe says, you will regret this.
Yes.
It's so good.
And she does. And she does regret it.
There's this line where she says, it's bad when white people do black magic. And it's interesting, there are two different sharias, and, you have to keep within your own rules, within your own game. If you try to play the black game, it's because you're not black. It's not going to work for you, particularly.
Yes, yes, indeed. It becomes this appropriation of, which is immediately misappropriation. and therefore it backfires. You don't have a kind of fundamental understanding of what it actually means to engage in that. I think the part with the black magic, with the voodoo or obeya, I think it's called obeya in the book, is for me one of the most amazing elements, exactly as you say, because it contrasts this rational Victorian mind. You know, Jane is so rational; she's taking all decisions with full control of herself. So that's why she's like contrasted to this mad woman in the attic, you know, who is completely lost. She has no sense of herself. She is lost in love. You said it. You know, she gives up herself in order to have this to have this love. Whereas Jean would never compromise, and she would never engage in that. So that's almost like the ideology of the rational love versus the mad love. And I love that Rhys actually has that element, although it could be used against her.
Of course.
Right? I mean, it could be used like, okay, well, it could be just confirmed that, you know, those people in the Caribbean, they are irrational, they are exotic, they are all this and that. But as you say, Christophine is supremely rational.
Yeah, I find that very interesting. And also, but to kind of side, if we wanted to, with Antoinette, then you, okay, I mean, this is a question for the ages. Of course, love very often ends in pain. And then if we're going to contrast the love that Antoinette experiences and Jane experiences, you know, the case for Antoinette would be that she feels very highly, or I don't know, like it's very strong what she feels, whereas what Jane feels is maybe something inferior in that sense. So what is, you know, you kind of, is experience the supreme thing that we're going for? If experience is the thing, then Antoinette is the winner because she experiences much more than Jane does.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in Jane Eyre, she burns down the house.
Yeah, what else can she do?
I mean, that is the top of that experience. That is the ultimate expression of
it's very Sufi, isn't it? She burns with love.
She burns with love, absolutely. And I love that contrast because Jane, in her rational Victorian attitude, has to kind of sacrifice this mad love. So the love as madness, in order to. Jean Rhys, in a sense, asks, well, which is the real love? Because we put Jane Eyre's kind of love on a pedestal as a model, right? And she's, in a sense, asking, well, who says that is the right love? I mean, what is love without a little bit of madness?
Exactly. And again, if you look at Jean Rhys's other books, it's always, of course, it's always about disappointed love. But I mean, it's pages and pages of, you know, how she's feeling. And it's, you know, she's looking at, I don't know, at a room, and the room is conjuring up so many feelings. Sometimes it's just too much. She has to leave the room. So it's like this heightened reality. It's augmented reality, as it were. You know, everything signifies, and it's almost too much. And you could, you know, make an argument for that. You mean that is like living life to the full. Although, you know, it will rather end up in disappointment.
Oh yes, absolutely. But that is the territory of the love story. You know, the beginning of my podcast, I use this phrase that love stories give love a bad name. You know, so it's kind of part of the love game that it's especially love stories cannot really have happy endings. To continue a little bit more on the magic, what exactly is it that Antoinette asks for, and what is this magic? Can it actually make him love her? When Christophine says that it's going to backfire,
Well, yeah.
What does she mean? So why will it not produce love, this magic?
Well, maybe at this point we go back to Jane Eyre's definition of love, because if the love is not somehow coming from within or within these mental processes that I like this person as an individual, then it's going to expire. Mm-hmm. And what this Obeah does is that, Christophine is able to maybe bring Rochester, and this is exactly what Antoinette wants, bring him back to her bed for one more night. And again, and I think people in love, when they are separated from the people they love, they always think, if I had one more chance to show my feelings, it's all going to turn out better. But, with or without the magic, it's not that way, because once it's mentally over, it's over. And because, Rochester comes to the bed, and because afterwards he feels he has been tricked, and this is what Christophine says, he's going to hate you even more. And he does. And again, we've been focusing on what Antoinette has been feeling for Rochester, but Rochester's feelings towards Antoinette as well. I mean, he feels he's been tricked, and so this grows into sort of hatred, just as Christophine has said.
Yeah, just as you predicted, definitely, because he feels that, exactly as you say, this notion of love which we have in Jane Eyre is kind of retroactively put into Rochester of that pre Jane Eyre period. It's kind of incorrect when it comes to his characterization, but it's almost like he is thinking he came there to have this arranged marriage. He was okay with that. He was going to go through with it. And yet,
love wasn't in the plan.
but love wasn't in the plan, exactly. So that wasn't a part of the deal.
Yes.
Passion was not a part of the deal. So
just as Antoinette, he also has fears about self-possession. He wants to remain this logical white Englishman. But if he gives way to his passion, he sees that he can. And actually, this is something, sometimes when I do post-colonial studies courses, it's very good to compare this with Heart of Darkness. How, the white man is so concerned about losing his mind. So it's not just Antoinette losing her mind here, it's actually Rochester losing his mind and decided, okay, if one of us is going to lose their mind, it has to be Antoinette, and that's going to happen in England.
Oh, yes, definitely. Because if she loses her mind, that it just confirms that the natives are crazy.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas if I lose my mind, then England is crazy. And
and we can't have that.
Yeah, two crazy people in love, that doesn't work, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's amazing. So Obeah is there really kind of just sexual arousal?
Exactly. Whatever, some kind of very potent, paste that he ate or something. I don't know.
Yes. Some kind of aphrodisiac, kind of old-fashioned Viagra or whatever.
Something like that. That's the only explanation. And Christophine says this very clearly. It's just going to arouse him. It's not going to make him love you.
Exactly. So in that, would you say then that Christophine really distinguishes between erotic and spiritual love? Like love as eros and love as maybe not philia, but some kind of a deeper love that is. I'm kind of interested in this kind of the way that she distinguishes the two kinds rather than saying that they are two sides of the same coin.
Because Antoinette comes with a particular request, she's explaining, this kind of erotic side of it. But maybe if I do another reading, I may find Christophine talking about romantic love. But I don't think there's any space in Christophine's life for romantic love. She says, I've got 3 children and 3 by different men. So she just doesn't believe in marriage or sort of this romantic bond. But again, when she's trying to convince her that, Obeah is not for you, she says, speak to him, tell him. So maybe that is that speaking could be the romantic side, or that could sort of sustain the romantic bond. I mean, if you're not able to communicate with a person, your love is just going to die. And I mean, this happens today still. I mean, you hear all the time, there may be sexual attraction, but if you cannot communicate, the relationship is not going to last.
Definitely, you can't live on Eros all day. However, weird it sounds to say this right now, but yeah, it seems to me that there is something historical, like in these books, that we have different cultures, different personalities, different characters, but they keep kind of confirming the same kind of ideology of love as, the danger of Eros, the burning versus the rational versus the more kind of clearer recognition of the other as they are, as a basis of love. And I love this contrast that you use, that Christophine actually doesn't believe in romantic love, but still uses that spiel.
Of course.
That's really amazing. I love Christophine's character. Definitely my favorite.
Yes.
Especially because she is the one that counters madness. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's very interesting. And the madness is kind of then sort of heaped upon Antoinette. And again, it goes back to these colonial categories. So the black woman is rational in her own context. The white man is rational in his context. But when you mix the two, and when you actually have a female white Creole, that's where the madness happens. So people make sense in their own contexts because, of course, Antoinette is out of context. There is a white woman in the Caribbean. That's how she becomes kind of porous and sort of open to these madnesses and passions and all kinds of things. And maybe it's a regressive message, but what you get is that miscegenation is not a very good thing. I mean, sort of. If there's purity, there won't be madness, kind of thing. I don't know.
Oh, that's really interesting. But then with madness, we have madness in Jane Eyre as well. Of course, Antoinette is the epitome of madness as the mad woman in the attic. The madness that needs to be locked up, isolated, so it doesn't burn down the society, right? So there are two things that for me are really interesting here. One, the connection between Antoinette and Jane, because people have tried to persuade Jane that she is mad, that she has madness in her blood. And they do the same thing to Antoinette.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you read the text, I mean, particularly the first chapters of Jane Eyre are horrifying. I mean, she's locked into this red room. So even before Antoinette gets locked, we have Jane getting locked up.
Yes.
And one of my favorite things is that if you remember, Jane paints things, right? She paints these sceneries. And I find it so beautiful that she's painting these wild seascapes. And I'm thinking, oh my God, Antoinette is in her mind. Antoinette is arriving on the ship and Jane is painting these seascapes. So you could even, from a feminist point of view, I think, read a kind of like a collective feminist or feminine sort of mindscape that oscillates between rationality and madness. And that is why the more you read the two texts together, it's like writing together rather than writing back. So I find that really inspiring.
Oh yes, that's exactly my impression as well. That there are so many converging points. There are so many similarities. So she's not simply trying to. Let's say present or represent Antoinette and pit her against Jane and make them look like they are like the opposites, the two kinds of women. So she's really trying to bring them closer and explore one by means of the other. So rather than, and this is what I love, maybe we are both of us scholars and we do these theoretical analyses, but this is an analysis at the deepest level which no paper can produce.
I was just going to say, like, when I was, it seems like a treatise in that sense that, she's already written. Well, I have to say, when I was writing my dissertation, I was quoting Jean Rhys at such length that the editor said, "You can't do this. We're gonna run foul of copyrights," because I want to say, like, just read the text. It tells you everything you need to know.
That's quite right. Yes, it's one of those moments when you're like, "Well, it's all here. What am I even doing? So what's my role here? I'm just going to ruin it." Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is why I would say that this novel, yes, it's kind of an Empire Striking Back, but it's really a love letter at its core.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's magical in many ways, and it really. I'm puzzled by this notion of madness because what she really makes us think: what is madness? Where does it come from? What are the conditions for madness? How do
I'm getting my dates confused, but she would be a contemporary of Foucault, wouldn't she? Because I think she died in the 70s. You know the story about how she was lost and then people thought she was dead?
No.
Oh, okay. So Jean Rhys wrote her, actually, Wide Sargasso Sea is her last novel. Mm-hmm. So she wrote these very short, very modernist novels. She was kind of on the margins of the Bloomsbury group, well, later than Bloomsbury group, but all these kind of modernists. And she was known as a modernist writer. And then I think on the radio, she heard that she was being referred to as dead. So she calls the BBC and says, "I'm not dead. I'm just living in Devon doing nothing." And then she dies in the 70s. And, there's a huge gap between the short novels that she wrote and then Wide Sargasso Sea. So you also see Wide Sargasso Sea as a culmination. It's almost like it is what she set out to do in her writing life anyway. But I guess she had to come to a kind of sort of maturity to be able to do that. So the reason you were talking about madness, because of course, when we talk about madness, it's always Foucault. But did Foucault steal from Rhys? This is what we need to find out.
Oh, that would be very interesting, yes, to see, because I think the history of madness in literature, or just madness in relation to female characters especially, and as you mentioned, the Heart of Darkness and the white man going mad is the white man going native. Mm-hmm. And this kind of madness of the other, these people in the jungle are irrational. They're just screaming, and there's no articulation of speech. It's not proper speech. It's not all these things that contrast, that create the notion of sanity.
Yeah.
It feels to me that Rhys is really saying, okay, well, I think we need to bring back some madness, because why would we do define love as, truly, madly, deeply. So the true, the mad, and the deep are all three elements of love.
But again, we ask the question of how important is self-possession for self-realization. And this is an ongoing religious and theoretical debate. I mean, are we more ourselves if we stick to ourselves, or are we more ourselves, or do we fulfill our aim if we open ourselves and we become in the religious sense, it's a sort of larger collective. But I mean, it's about opening yourself up, the love for the community or the love for this other person. So how much you close yourself and how much you open yourself is, I think, at the root of what love, or what kind of love there is.
Well, definitely. So I do always feel a little bit uncomfortable with Jane Eyre's own insistence of, I need to have a stable self in order to love and to be loved, and that self needs to be recognized. Since you mentioned the religious context earlier, you mentioned the Sufis, the idea of giving up the self is the idea of the ultimate love,
Exactly.
the
It's
ultimate
only by
act of
giving
love.
up yourself that you kind of experience something that is higher than you. But again, I mean, does everybody want that?
No, not everyone wants that. Definitely not. It's just a different kind of ways of thinking around love and how to achieve it. But there's definitely kind of this urge that everyone wants love. I was always curious. You said that Antoinette wanted Rochester, and it's really interesting because when he comes, she's not in love with him, and suddenly she desires him or wants him, and where does it even come from? Why would she even?
I Good question. I mean, you could again maybe connect it to the kind of books that she's been reading, and then she realizes, this is what I'm supposed to do in this situation. Here's a man who's come from England, and I have to present myself or I have to feel certain things for him because this is what the novels tell me I should be, and it's only, and that's the thing. I mean, her connection, just like Jean Rhys's connection to England, this god, is through books. And so I have to sort of live by the book, as it were, and sort of just take on this role. And it's so easy for people to convince themselves that they're in love. I mean, this is the case still today. So I think that's how it happens.
It's funny you should say this.
Okay.
Because one of the kind of basic assumptions that I've kind of used in the beginning of the podcast series is the question of where does love come from? Is it innate or is it taught? And where do we learn it? And my idea is like we learn it from books.
Yes.
And then we try to copy these scenarios. We try to
role
be
play.
these characters. Yeah, a role play. Yes, exactly. And so I consider Jane Eyre as being one of those classics which has affected the way we think about love. A lot. I mean, it's still produced, reproduced, read, made into movies, series, and all these things.
I mean, yes. I mean, it's the one book of English literature even my mother has read, that kind of influence.
You see, exactly. I mean, there are those works which are like the key works. Everyone at least knows the story. And I love that you say that Antoinette learns from books, and so does Jane Eyre. She also learns from books, and we learn from Jane Eyre, and we read these books. So it's like this.
We're all waiting for the white Englishman to
There
fall
is
in love.
nothing outside the books. Yes, but the stories give love a bad name. So we are not really learning to not do what's in the books. In a sense, we are following these scripts, which will lead to these bad consequences. So for me, this is so curious. I think there is this meta-narrative about law being learned.
Yes, but the promise is if you do fall in love, you're going to feel these great or these strong things. That's the promise.
That's the promise.
So it's just like trying to, again, it's this augmented reality that love promises to you. You just want to put the headset on and live in that world.
Yes, absolutely. Just and for me, what's interesting is that there is almost kind of a contradiction in this. That the English, they wanted to use their literature, their books, to impose them on the colonial subjects. This is why I mentioned this story when they burn the English books in Jean Rhys's world, and there's almost like the contradiction is that you impose these books on people, and then when they act according to them, then they are mad.
Yes. But of course, I mean, everything depends on the interpretation, right? So the way Antoinette performs Englishness is different than, how Jane Eyre performs Englishness. So it's in the performance that these discrepancies happen.
Oh yeah, definitely. The performativity is so It's sort of in this performativity, what is the role of names? Because the main thing in both Jane Eyre and Wide Sargasso Sea is the change of the name.
Absolutely.
That Rochester deliberately changes Antoinette's name to Bertha.
It's so interesting because when I first read Wide Sargasso Sea, I thought that Jean Rhys had made up the word Antoinette. Having read that, I went back to Jane Eyre. It's there, actually. The full name is there. And I was surprised. I hadn't even registered that this woman was called something else.
That's
and
amazing.
I mean, why would you call yourself Bertha if you also have the name Antoinette?
Yes.
So it's interesting how what our expectations are also from what English women are called. Of course, Antoinette is French. And as you were saying, I mean, Rochester and Antoinette are not equals because,
No.
of course, with Frenchness, quote unquote, comes a kind of a worldliness that doesn't exist in Englishness. So, if you wanted to stretch this, further, and again, it's within the Creole identity that there are so many different influences that the white English identity finds it very difficult to contain. And that is why they find it very dangerous. So anything that Antoinette does is foreign. And, the British have a particular, I don't want to say hatred, but particular misgiving towards Frenchness. So that plays into, how dangerous Antoinette is. And understandably, if they go to England, Rochester is going to name her Bertha to make her more homely. I mean,
Yeah, definitely.
first, Bertha.
Yes, definitely. It's so symbolic, and it's the difference in the connotations of the names and the feel, just the aesthetics of the names is stunning because it really is kind of making plain or uglifying this creature that is stunning in every way.
And again, in the conversation with Christophine back in the Caribbean, Antoinette says, and then he keeps calling me Bertha. But, I mean, she hates it. But even that, she's, willing to say, okay, I will even take that if I can have his love, whatever this love is.
Love means, yes. I suppose from a modern point of view, as readers do nowadays, is they complain about characters like she should have done this, she should have done that. How people read it now, like, oh, I'm so disappointed in this character. She's not feminist enough, or she's not this and that. But the way Rhys does it is she's really showing these conditions and how they're working against her and what she's really facing.
And also, I think that also actually supports my view that Rochester, the love of Rochester is the love of England. Because how we know immigrants somehow to integrate, they change their names.
They change their names, yes. Yeah.
And again, today, I mean, sometimes we're judgmental. Why did they, particularly Muslims, do this? Why did they do this? Blah, blah, blah. We can judge them. We shouldn't judge them. So in that way, it's also a metaphor. When do you change your name? When you get a new citizenship. So she literally gets a new citizenship.
Definitely.
Through Rochester. Indeed.
The thing is that it's even worse because we do it willingly and deliberately to adapt. Rhys shows it as more an act of violence from his side. He changes the name, and then it's clearer that the violence. But when we do it ourselves, not just accepting the way Antoinette does, it's this kind of self-violence, self-mutilation that is kind of naturalized.
Absolutely. I'm all for people changing their names. I mean, as you said, I'm in the UK at the moment, and when I call a cab, they say, so who is it for? And I'm like, It's for N-I-J. No, it's just Ad or Hannah, whatever, just write down anything. I just don't want to spell my name every single time.
Exactly. Just give me the damn cab. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. So I have so many students. I'm sure you as well. If when you teach in these places, you have people who there is a name on the list, and you want to do your best to honor the name and pronounce it the best way, and then they just tell you, "No, call me Susan," or whatever, something else. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm all for it.
Yes, yeah, it's really sad, and I think it's such a beautiful book. Although it's very short, it's much shorter than Jane Eyre. I feel it's almost packed even more. I mean, this is something you said earlier. Like it burns with this energy that it's a novella. It's a kind of an easy read, but it's so packed with everything that it's for me feels longer and more kind of full of content than one of those big baggy classics.
Yeah, I mean, you read a paragraph and you have to stop and digest.
Yes.
And then continue. So you can't really just read. I mean, if you wanted to, of course, you could read it fast, but there's so much to unpack in everything. And she is super economical with words. I mean, there isn't anything redundant in it. I mean, not to call Bronte redundant, but I mean, of course, in Jane Eyre, there are lots of just sort of very long descriptions. And of course, the context they're writing in, is very different, because that's what a Victorian novel should be like. It should be long, where people can sort of spend long winter nights reading them publicly. But this is more like, almost like a prose poem.
Yes.
That you really have to digest and sort of look at every single word. And of course, as a Creole, she's using all these, Creole words, French words. So you really have to be very ready at all times to be sort of confronted with, things that may not be familiar to you.
Yes, absolutely. And that is this kind of, it asks you to have more of an ethical response, aesthetic and ethical, because you need to digest this, you need to accept things as they are and not judge them from any kind of theoretical point of view or, your preconceived ideas, how books should be, how they should be read and so on. And I love when a book does that to you, when it really says, well, I'm in charge here. You follow me. I tell you how to read me, and you don't come and tell me, you're not Rochester. It makes you feel like Rochester. You want to order it. You want to say, okay, well, this thing should be here. This thing should be there. No, you read it in this order. And that makes sense.
Yes, and also it's good that, again, coming back to Rochester, one of the other things that people talk about with Wide Sargasso Sea is that at one point, the narrative perspective changes. So we get it first from Antoinette's perspective, and then all of a sudden, without warning, we are seeing things through Rochester's perspective. And of course, this is, again, a radical, let's say, act on the part of Jean Rhys, because again, as a white Creole woman, she is now the one who is dictating what Rochester is thinking. So it's, Caribbean 1, England 0 kind of a situation.
Oh, yes. That's so absolutely wonderful and brilliant. Nagihan, or I can call you by any other name if you want. For this, we can change our names for this podcast.
Yes.
We can change it mid, so I can, we can start with Adnan and Nagihan, and then we can become other people throughout the podcast. But I want to thank you so much for this conversation. It was such a pleasure talking about this.
Thank
novel.
you so much for getting back to Rhys. And I was thinking, particularly looking at Christophine and how she remains like the center of rationality in this book really struck me in this rereading. So maybe there's something I need to write about that.
Oh, please. So you're returning after a long time after your
Yes.
PhD, returning to this, where it all started. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I would love to read that
Thank you.
that paper. Yeah. Thanks so much. Bless you.
You're very welcome.